Yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for listening to my talk. Today it's about future of church, and I asked the question, what could be the future of church? Well, there are many ideas what the future will bring. I have some special idea about it, and you will see. So first of all, who am I? Bernd Winkelstraeter. I'm a business agility coach. That means I deal with agile transformation in my professional life. I have some IT background for 29 years. I have studied work and organizational psychology, and that brings it together why I'm talking about agile. My church background is I'm a member of the International Baptist Church in Bielefeld in Germany. That means I have an evangelical background. So the question is, what could be the future of the church? And my idea is that it could be Agile Church, because there are so many things going on in the 21st century that we need to think about changing. So this talk, as I said, is a bit innovative. So it's brought up for friendly discussion. So I hope you will look positive on this one, and be also prepared to leave your comfort zone, because you will really realize that it is maybe different than what you are used to. So we have a detailed agenda. So I start with an intro, motivation, and then I look at what is the situation of the evangelical church today with my special focus of this presentation. Then we will have the first Q&A session. We will have a look into what our mental model of organizations have to do with our perception, how church could look like. Then what makes an agile organization? Another Q&A session. Then new perspective on biblical leadership, that biblical leadership is agile. And ready for the VUCA world. I explain that term afterwards. So you will maybe learn a new perspective on biblical leadership. Then I ask the question, what may happen if the church does not become agile? There are some consequences to that. Another Q&A. Then how to lead an agile transformation, some do's and don'ts, summary call to action, some suggested reading, and then another Q&A, and then we have come to an end. And at the end, please fill out the evaluation forms online. Yeah, so what are the goals of my talk and some non-goals to set the scope a bit? So I would like to give a kind of wake-up call from an organizational perspective. I would like to show that there are lots of biblical resources that we have that we can prepare for change. I would like to inspire thoughts and discussions. My non-goals are, I don't want to question your church or your organization, so please don't think I want to criticize it. I don't want to drop any biblical values, principles, or visions. And I don't want to make the church conform to the world. So this is what I don't want. I hope you realize afterwards why I make state these goals and non-goals. So why is this topic relevant now? Well, the 21st century is called a VUCA world. What does it mean? I explained the term VUCA in a minute. Many disruptions I had. There's digitalization. We all now live in the corona pandemic. There's climate change coming. Lots and lots of changes. Companies, international companies like Amazon, Airbnb, or Uber cause disruptive competition for a local economy. And that means we are living in a VUCA world with lots of extremes. VUCA stands for extreme volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I will explain what that feels like in a minute. So, for example, some church examples for VUCA. Maybe you have planned your social media strategy on Facebook, but suddenly your youngsters switch to Instagram or TikTok. Online shops like Amazon kill your local shops, and the job cuts following kill your church finances and your running projects. Or in 2015, there was a huge refugee crisis in Germany or in Europe. Lots of needy people. Suddenly, maybe the church building is used as a refugee hostel, so you can't use it anymore. Or in the Corona crisis, as we see now, we can have no church services in the building. Street evangelization stops. There's a lot of stress on people, so there may arise team conflicts, which are difficult to solve online because you cannot meet as team anymore. Maybe members start disengaging and you may lose finances. So lots of changes suddenly there. And the question is, how can you handle this as an organization? So how does this VUCA feel like? Well, my favorite picture for that is that of a windsurfer. So what you see here is somebody more or less standing on this surfboard. There are lots of wave around, lots of wind around. There is no single stable point. There's only constant movement. There's only up and down. He cannot plan anymore. He cannot think anymore. He just has to react. Very instantaneous and very volatile. But as you might see, he also has fun. So it doesn't mean it's a catastrophe. The question is, how do you handle it? And if you handle it, you may even have fun. So the question is, are our churches ready for such a future? Are we strong, mature enough, flexible enough? Are we even preparing for that? And the interesting thing is that in business, many organizations are forced to pursue an agile transformation now. I explain what the agile means in a minute. The business companies have to handle enormous uncertainty because the markets are changing very, very fast and very unexpected. So they have to focus on rapidly changing customer needs and handle enormous uncertainty. So the challenge for business and also churches, I think, is that traditional structures and culture foster stability, not adaptability. That means if you have a hierarchy, and I paint a little black and white picture here. So if you have a strict hierarchy, it is based on command and control. So the top boss tells what to do and the others do, and the boss is controlling what happens. A hierarchy lives by secrets and power, and it limits mutual trust. So if there are no secrets, it's difficult to keep the power. So there is a cultural influence there. A strict hierarchy promotes certain leader types, those who have good elbows. And the strict hierarchy fosters loyalty to the system, not to the organization's purpose. That means lots of people do something that is not in the interest of the organization, but as long as it is not seen, they think it's okay. According to several studies, such hierarchical structures demotivate vast majority of people involved. Some studies say that 85% of all employees are disengaged today, and that means the whole system is somehow corrupt. So, without becoming agile, our churches may lose relevance to society in this VUCA world. The reason is because in principle a strict hierarchy is too slow. If you have a hierarchy as shown here in the picture, and it's a strict hierarchy, which is of course not often the case, you have to ask the top of the pyramid if you have to make certain decisions. And that means the hierarchical channel is pretty long, because if you have a deep hierarchy, it's over several stages, and it takes time until you get the okay to go ahead. That means the decision making is slow, and if you think about the surfer on the waves, if he takes slow decisions, he will drown in the water. So that's not the solution. So what about the evangelical church today? Why is this topic relevant for evangelical leaders? Well, we have the Bible as foundation and traditional values and culture, and it's for a reason, because the Bible is our foundation, but it's also an historic book. That means the stories written in it are 2,000 years old, and there was no digitalization, of course. Traditional structures that we have are often somewhat hierarchical. It depends on your denomination. Some may be very flat, some may be very deep, some may have none, so very innovative churches may have none, I don't know. But if you have a deep traditional hierarchy, you may have a problem for the future. One reason why we think in hierarchy may be the Constantinian shift in, say, 380 AD, when the church became the state church. So everything was organized like things in the state. And so it was a pretty hierarchical system with the emperor on top. So the question is, do we have a blind spot? Can we think of church without any form of hierarchy? And I believe many people in church cannot today. So another fact is that many leaders complain that the believers in church lack maturity, flexibility. They are not mature Christians. The pastors have to do everything on their own. It could well be that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. How do I come to this conclusion? There was a management professor, McGregor, at MIT. He lived up to the 1960s, so it's not a new research. He thought about what is our concept of man. In German, it's a Menschenbild. And he developed two theories. The one theory is that if you think of human beings, they are lazy and man doesn't want to take responsibility. The theory Y is, well, men are highly self-motivated and man wants to take responsibility. So that means he is actively trying to do something, take responsibility and change the world. The problem with that is that both theories, theory X and theory Y, confirm their leadership style as self-fulfilling prophecy. I show this here and with theory X. So we start at the top in this circle. If the leader believes in theory X, that means he leads by command and control. That has as effect that there is very low employee motivation because people don't feel treated very well. That means the employee working according to rules, so they don't invent new things, they are not very creative. And that confirms the leader believing in theory X because the result is exactly what he or she expected. The same works with theory Y. If you expect your employees to be highly self-motivated and you treat them accordingly, you will get proof that this is indeed the case. So the question is the lack of maturity of believers maybe a self-fulfilling prophecy of the hierarchy and the leadership style? So what is the risk if we don't become agile and we cannot adjust so fast to these changes that are coming? Well, the risk is we are losing relevance to the unchurched society from a business perspective that is comparable with our external customers. And what if we can't keep up with that VUCA world? That means the world will not listen to us if we have no answers. The world is currently finding answers to this problem, but only the business world and probably not the church. So will we at some point become a museum like the Hagia Sophia? That is the most beautiful church I know. You see in the top, it was a Christian one. You see all the Arabic signs. That means it was a mosque in between, and now it's a museum. So if we don't adapt, or we will not be able to adapt with these radical changes, we may lose relevance to society. I have studied work and organizational psychology. That means I think of organizations as social entities, not just of structures. And that's why I come to this point. Our thinking of organizations may suffer from some blind spots, and this may influence our model of organizations. So how does our mental model of organizations play into that? Each time and culture has its own understanding of organizations. I can't go very deep into that, but I give you just two extreme examples. For at some point in time, science believed that organizations are behaving completely rational. That means you can explain everything in the organization by their rules, which is in effect a kind of mechanistic organizational perspective. That means, let's say, the CEO at the top can decide something, he commands something, and everything will be done according to what he wants. In reality, that is not the case, because people are human beings and there are lots of things going on in the system. So this mechanistic worldview is not really compatible to how we encounter organizations in real life. Maybe one of the most extreme counterexamples is the model of organizations as being complex adaptive systems. That means in the 1990s, science learned from complexity theory, chaos theory, and they learned that living beings are extremely complex, composed of independent subsystems and whatever, and very little changes can change the whole system. So if a few coronavirus get into your blood, you will see that you really have chaotic cause effects in your system. So even very small changes can have very big influences. And that's completely different to the mechanistic view that everything is done as the rules say. So in essence, each organizational model leads to some corresponding model of leadership. So if you have a mechanistic organizational perspective, then you will expect that you can steer the organization, and you will usually do it by facts and figures. That means you measure everything, you control everything, and you think what the CEO tells and does will be implemented 100%. If you have a perspective of complex adaptive systems, you will do something like Management 3.0. That is a book I recommend at the end. And you will lead by exactly not leading. That means you provide just guidelines, you provide just the playing field for your employees, and they decide. And ideally, you try to drive the system at the edge of chaos, because that is the point where the system learns the most and the system is at most adaptive. So you can compare that to, let's say, soccer training or whatever. If the trainer wouldn't drive the players into out of their comfort zone, they would not learn. So you go constantly at the edge, not fall off the edge, but you almost go to the chaos, and that leads to very creative things on the playing field. So for innovation, it's much better to be at the edge of chaos. So having said that, since most churches think of their structure in hierarchical terms, is my question, and I put that up for discussion, is our traditional hierarchy the only biblical church model? You will see what that means. It's a bit provocative, I understand, but in a few slides you will understand that maybe not as provocative as you think. So of course, if everybody in the system does whatever they like, how can an organization persist? So we have chaos, so we don't want that. So something needs to control what happens. The question is that some hierarchy or something else? For example, I draw something here, a simple denomination. It's just a symbol with central office services. So you have a hierarchy, whatever, you have a member layer, you have maybe a deacon layer, a pastor and elders layer, you have a denomination headquarter. In this simple example, you have only 2 churches. The denomination headquarter is above the 2 churches, and the denomination headquarter has on the right side some central office service, for example, counseling pastors, counseling members, whatever, doing public relations for the church also. So depending on how strict the hierarchy is, the denomination headquarter has a lot to say into the local churches, or it may be just a loosely coupled headquarter. So that heavily depends on the church. But it's a hierarchical system. Although it's a matrix, it's a hierarchical system. There is one top that decides what's going on. And please remember, your church may have a hierarchy that is not so strict, so please don't feel offended. So now, having talked about hierarchical organization, what makes an agile organization? So how do agile organizations differ from traditional ones? So remember that windsurfer, he has a lot of fun, but he has no single constant point, no single reference line. Everything is new all the time. There's no, that's an extreme case, there's no procedure that worked yesterday that will work tomorrow. That's why I use this picture. It's somehow an exaggeration of what the VUCA world brings. So what is an agile organization? An agile organization is ready for the VUCA world. That means it's flexible, proactive, always learning and adapting. So that means in the 80s and 90s, we have talked about organizational change. You can think of this as being permanent change. So the change is the rule, and the plateau or whatever, the steady state is the rare exception. That's of course an extreme example, but that tells you what agile is. And just imagine this windsurfer is not just a single person, but an organization. That means there are, in this picture, there are 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people on that surfboard, and they try to surf through the wind and through the waves as an organization. As a single person, it's already difficult to learn that agility, but as an organization, it's even more harder. So the question is, how can this ever become a reality? So what makes an agile organization? It's a focus and learning to match rapidly changing customer needs. That's what's happening in the business world. And if we consider, let's say, the people outside the church as our customer who need the gospel, that is very similar. So if you don't know what's happening, if you can't apply any rules from the past, the only thing you can do is experimentation. That means you constantly running experiments, whether things work or not, and whether the customer, means the people outside the church, accept that, are interested in that. You have a positive failure culture. That means there's no blame game anymore. In a hierarchy, you're always afraid. It's a culture of fear. You're always afraid doing something wrong, breaking the rules. And in such an agile organization, there is no culture of fear. You're not talking about errors, you're talking about fallacies to learn from. So every so-called error is a chance to learn. It's about self-organization. That means there is pull instead of push. The work is not pushed on other people, but people pull the work towards them. And the self-organization enables decision-making wherever the information is available. You don't have to wait for an approval 5 levels above you. You can decide if you have all the information. It gets real. I have an interesting example in a few minutes. So the pull principle is let people pick their work, because we base here on theory Y. That means our concept of man is that human beings are highly intrinsically motivated, and if we just guide this intrinsic motivation, we will be able to do a lot of things. We enable free flow of information. That means no secrets, full transparency, and we foster learning, because we know there is no perfect way, we can only experiment. So free flow of information is something very different than in a hierarchy. In a hierarchy, as I said, we have secrets, because the secrets are needed to keep up power in many cases at least. So we ensure transparency and feedback. That means we have a social corrective. There is some corrective. So if something goes wrong, yes, there is a corrective system in place, but it may not be the boss who tells you, it may be your colleagues. So what about leadership in an agile organization? Leadership, while leadership in an extreme hierarchy is command and control, the leadership in an agile organization is based on empowerment, on trust and transparency. It provides vision and purpose, because these are the guidelines to enable self-organization. It's leading by values and principles, so everybody knows the rules of the system and can behave accordingly. It is about being a role model. And many agile organizations go to a flat peach model. I have a picture on that one. And the values and principles are guiding self-organization. So instead of a hierarchy, you think of concentric circles. That means it's a flat thing. It's not hierarchical. And the leadership is in the middle. It supports some groups, departments, teams, whatever outside. And on the surface, on the light green part, they are facing the customer, the outside world. And this system fosters decision-making when the needed information is available, because the idea is what you see here with the with the red arrows. You try to foster decentral decision-making. That means people who are dealing with the customer can make decisions because they know what the principles and values are, they know what the purpose is, they know what the vision is. And that means you don't have to escalate things to the center, because you know how to proceed, what to do, because the leadership has told you what the values, principles, and guidelines are. So what are these principles I talk about? What kind of principles allow self-organization? Just an example. One example would be anyone can buy what is needed for work. So it could be even a new machine that costs 1 million euro. So how can anybody in the company, anybody, I mean really anybody in the company, buy such a machine? I mean, if you would allow anybody to buy a machine for 1 million euro, you get chaos. No, you have just to implement 2 simple rules. Rule number 1 is you have to talk to all who are knowledgeable in that field, and you have to listen to them. The second rule is you have to talk to all who are possibly affected by this decision to buy this machine. And then you decide and buy. There's a little notice. You will check availability of finances in number 1 or 2. So you will ask the finance department. You won't fool others, because their decisions in future will affect you, and you want them that they ask you in future. And all is based on Agile core values. That means trust and transparency. If you trust each other in the company and everything is transparent, this will work. So the system regulates itself. You don't need a hierarchy to make the decision. What you need is the rules, the principles, the values, the culture to guide the system. So there is no need for central decision-making like a boss. That's an extreme case, of course. So now the big question we are in the L forum is, would such structure be biblical? Well, think about it. If in the center there would be this denominational headquarter, in the ring around it would be the pastors and elders of the local churches, in the next ring the deacons, and on the outside the members, you would still have this decentral decision making. So the denominational headquarter would lead by giving purpose and vision. The local pastors and elders would be servant leaders for local deacons and members, and the deacons would be servant leaders for local churches and members. And the members would say a foot would face the world. So I think this implementation of elders, deacons, and normal church members, that would still be biblical, but it would allow decentral decision making. Still not convinced? Maybe you are still doubting, and I understand that. I had a hard time learning that myself. So what is this? These are ants. Ants is a complex community without any central decision making. And you know what? Even the Bible recognizes that. So Proverbs 6, verse 6 to 8 talks about the lazy guy who should go to the ant, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provision in summer and gathers its fruit at harvest. So God in his creation gives us an example with little ants that there can be a complex organization without central decision making, and still it works. So I don't expect you to buy the idea immediately. It's hard to understand. I totally understand that. It took me quite a while to understand it all, but think about it, sleep about it, and then you will see. Why biblical leadership may be already more agile than you think. So if you think about biblical leadership, it may be already ready for the VUCA world. So if you look at Jesus and Paul, they were agile leaders. It's not in the Bible. Agile is not in the Bible, I agree, but they enable self-organization. They didn't give us a new law. They didn't give us new instructions. They gave us vision and purpose. They gave us values and principles to self-organize church. Otherwise, we couldn't build church today. So we don't have a second law. All we have is a new mindset from a psychology perspective. Jesus is our ultimate model for servant leadership. Servant leadership is a core term in Agile because you don't command, you are a servant of others. And that term comes from Robert K. Greenleaf, who was a Quaker, and it's clearly based on Jesus as the ultimate servant leader. It's just not quoted that way in the Agile literature. So listening to God and following his voice and spirit instead of our plans is truly agile. So, even Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. That means Jesus was completely dependent on what he was seeing, or what he saw God was doing. So in the picture of the surfer, he watched the wind and the waves, and then he acted accordingly. So Jesus, in my perspective, was very agile. Also, Peter was very agile. He went to Cornelius, although it was forbidden. Paul turning to Europe instead of Asia Minor, that was also very agile. So listening to God's voice, to the Holy Spirit, is definitely agile, I would say. You cannot plan anymore. That's the point. So Empowerment, transparency, and trust are the heart of biblical leadership. I think nobody will question that. I have to speed up a little bit. If you go to Peter, First Peter, whatever, it's clear that you empower your sheep, that you are a transparent leader. That I think nobody will question that. Welcoming errors and mistakes as opportunities to grow in God's grace is biblical. I mean, Paul says that God said to him, grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. So if we are weak, that means if we do errors, God is strong. So my conclusion is the problem is not our weakness, but our strength, our desire to control. So we cling to this to the idea of hierarchy because we don't know anything else and think that is the only biblical explanation of leadership, and it may be very different. And if you look, I mean, to the New Testament times, in the initial church, in the New Testament church, there was, let's say, outside the Jerusalem church, there was no real hierarchy. There were local elders and deacons and some apostles, but we didn't have any denominational structure or so. So we can't ignore this topic. Why? Things may happen when we don't become agile. It is not an option, I think. If we don't become agile, we will run to the situation that younger people will enjoy being agile on their job, because agility is now leaving the IT sector. It's going into service sector, into marketing, in HR, whatever. So if you follow what is going on in the business world, many kinds of business will run agile. And that means the younger people will enjoy it there and demand it in church, because the agile leaders in their professional life may be even more servant leaders than their leaders in church. So they respect them and empower them to self-organize. So I fear if we don't become more agile, we lose the young people that are already attending our church, because they will see so impressing role models of leadership in the secular world that they don't see at home in their church, because this church is still thinking hierarchical. So, and of course, if we don't have practical answers how to survive in this VUCA world, we become irrelevant for society. I mean, the society is struggling with all that chaos, and if we pull back on an island, we are not relevant. Why should they listen to us? So we have to become agile, at least to some extent. So I don't want to force it on anybody, but I think it's not the question whether we want to become agile. The question is what happens if we don't become? What does the world do with us if we don't become agile? How to lead an agile transformation? So if you want to change something, the question is how can you do that? And that's a very valid question. And trust me, this is very complex. It's not a trivial thing. And you will have some idea that it may not be easy. And in fact, it is not easy. So the first thing, if you want to do some kind of transformation, make sure everybody involved understands it and commits to the why. So if you don't agree that there is a reason to do that transformation, you will fail. And that means you probably can't start with the whole church, because the whole church will probably not align on this idea. So you would probably start with something much smaller than a whole church. Or you would not start with a whole organization, maybe just with a smaller part. So the problem is, if you try to force people to become agile, this is an oxymoron. Being agile means intrinsically motivated, and you cannot force somebody to be intrinsically motivated. So forget about the idea to force anybody to become agile. Either the people see it or they don't see it. If they don't see it, you can't do it. So that's the reason why I think you should start small, for example, in a team or a ministry, So look for people that are willing to change, that understand the idea, go organically, start with things that work, and so people are motivated to go further, and others may get interested to join it. So it's in big organizations, it's one way to do that by looking for volunteers, building these agile teams, and the others realize, oh, that's really different. These people have fun. I want to join this train. So make others hungry to join. You cannot force them. Forget the idea of forced change. Try to motivate people to become hungry for a different thing. Or you can, oh, I forgot, you can found something new. So maybe that is the easiest way of everything. So as a founder of organizations, you can set the organizational culture. So let's say if you have a traditional church, but you found a new ministry for some, I don't know, innovative ministry, you could set the rules that in this new ministry, the agile rules are active. And that means anybody who goes in there will have to commit to these rules, this culture. That means not everybody can go in there, but it's based on volunteering. So you can, agility works only if you have volunteers. Yeah, and start with volunteers and small changes. Sometimes culture hacks help. For example, do a time box. We have a hard time box here for the seminar. It's just 1 hour. So stop your meetings, for example, after 1 hour, no matter whether you have taken a decision or not. That will have a cultural effect on your system. And there are other smart culture hacks to change your system slowly. So you will not change a big system fast. It's just an evolution. It's very important to have a trust culture, for example, by retrospectives. That means a retrospective is a meeting where you not only discuss how did the project or the task work, what could we improve, but you're talking about how you collaborated. You talk about the team, about tensions in the team, about somebody being lazy, about somebody being an egomaniac leader or whatever. So in traditional systems, you don't talk on this level. So being agile requires a high level of soft skills. So be prepared to get feedback, and that feedback may be not positive, but the culture will level that out. So the culture is so welcoming, so encouraging, so empowering that you will welcome even feedback that you don't like. Okay, expect and deal with tensions to non-agile parts of the system. If you start to change one system, a part of the system, to agile, and the rest is not, there will be friction. So don't be surprised if you build up a little fence in your organization. You have to be smart and deal with that. Cultural fit is essential for agile. That means if you pick people, pick volunteers, and if you hire new staff, hire them for cultural compatibility. It's not the most important thing is not the professional capability. That's important, but it's much more important that the culture fits. If you hire somebody who cannot take feedback, you're done. So as leader, don't know all the answers, welcome errors, stay humble and patient. True change hurts. This is a real radical change, and don't expect you get there without pain. Lead by vision and purpose, by value and principles. Admit failures. You may ruin your reputation a little bit. Listen and learn. So I think these are all values that Christians can subscribe to. So it's not unbiblical. So when I first bumped into agile stuff, I was so surprised that things I would expect in church now happen in business terms, in business companies. I was completely shocked because I thought, oh, are these all angels? Well, no, they are not. The transparency is a huge correcting factor so that it makes things work. So summing it up, summary, call to action. In business, the VUCA world forces many organizations to become agile. Agile leadership is compatible, and I think more than compatible, I have that at the bottom, with biblical leadership principles and values. So Jesus was perfectly agile, Paul was perfectly agile. Being agile likely requires big changes for church leadership structure and culture. And yeah, the little asterisk, in fact, we as church should have been the ones driving the agile transformation. It's shocking that we didn't. So we're already losing the train. Let's jump on it and do it in a biblical way. Not being agile, we may lose our young generation that already attends church, because I expect them to found agile churches. They will leave traditional churches and found their own according to these principles. Biblical churches has lots of resources for agile. So if you are a biblical leader, if you are a humble, spirit-filled leader, you will be agile by definition, I would say. So my vision for the church is that the church should be an agile training field. So for me, the value of a church is it helps me for life. And if our young people learn how to live agile in a VUCA environment, they will stick to the church because they have learned something very valuable for their life. If they don't find that in the church, they will leave. So the big question is, are you as church leaders open, willing, able to become more agile? Because it starts all with the leaders. If you don't change, become more agile, the church won't, and your organization won't. Yeah, I'm coming to the end because we are running out of time. Suggested reading. These are secular books, and yeah, you have to judge that. So I would say 80% of that I can subscribe to. There are certain things where I would be reluctant, but it's an eye-opener, especially the right one. So this is the left one is a 300 pages book or 400 pages. I would not read that. The right one is a kind of comic, and you can read it in 2 evenings. It's amazing how different people can view organizations, and there are real examples of businesses that work according to such self-organization principles. And remember, this is a big movement now globally. So this whole reinventing organization movement is just one of many, and it's already spanning the globe. Jürgen Appello Management 3.0. This is the classical management book for agile IT management, but you can learn a lot. It's about the origins of agile leadership and how to manage that. Many tools also very interesting. And I found a book I cannot, frankly, I have ordered it on Amazon, but I didn't receive it. So there is some, I think it may be somebody of Episcopal Church who wrote this book. This is the only book about Agile Church I found on Amazon. Please read it and test it. I have no clue, but it's about spirit-led innovation in an uncertain age. So the topics he is dealing with is the VUCA world. So I expect him to do similar things that I do here with this presentation. But I cannot guarantee. Judge on your own. Okay, test everything and behold the good. If you want to stay in touch, you can email me. So I have founded a little organization that is kind of startup incubator for innovative Christian projects. Just remember this email. You can also contact me in the app.